Yeah, let's begin. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. It is a beautiful day on Cape Cod, and we have, I know, many people viewing on live stream as well. So we're glad that you are viewing, and it is such a joy, as always, to have the Reverend Dr. Bruce Epperly with us, and he is going to be bringing us an important word about the United Church of Christ and all things theological. So, Bruce, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's such a wonderful crowd here. It's a great crowd. People I even were here yesterday and they decided to come back on a second day. And in a way, I'll continue the conversation from yesterday's sermon in some ways. Someone who mentioned I was giving a bit of a cheerleading sermon. And in fact, I was. Again, it was on Philippians yesterday. And Philippians is one book where Paul is a cheerleader. He was in a community he loved, a community that was doing all the right things. And when people are doing all the right things, you should tell them and then give them a bit of at a person or at a church, so to speak, an at a church. And these are challenging times for churches, and I'll try to be a bit conversational. I always come with more preparation than I need, and I never know who's going to be here. So I'm going to do like I always try to do, which is express complex thoughts in understandable ways. Because that's the point. But we're going to have some time for conversation, and I'll stop from time to time like I would in a class, although this is not going to have that class style. But still, it's communication is the key. As the prophet Habakkuk said, write the vision and make it plain, and then send it out. And I began yesterday's conversation with something I typically do whenever I give public talks. I invoke Dag Hammarskjöld, the General Secretary of the United Nations. For all that has been, thanks for all that shall be. Yes. The thanks is that all of us stand on the shoulders of other people, right? The thanks is I think whenever I'm giving a talk or a sermon, I think how I got here. How I got to this place. And I think of my professors who inspired me as an undergraduate and a graduate and seminary student. I think of the ministers who trained me and who even trained me after I was an ordained minister, because they were models of ministry to me when I was a younger minister who planned to be an academic but ended up being much better off because I was in both worlds. Going from the pulpit to the classroom or the hospital to writing something which was enriching for me. I tried to be a theologian who was a pastor and a pastor who was a theologian. And it enriched me, and it gave me the opportunity over the years to share with both communities, to share with the theological community and share with congregations, because every congregation is theological. Everyone's a theologian. A theologian is just simply somebody who tries to make sense of the world. We're all trying to do that, right? Somebody who tries to make sense of living and dying, of growing older, of having babies, of the world situation, of why we behave this way and why other people behave this way. You become a theologian. And some of you who are around younger people get amazing theological questions. I remember driving down the road with James Epperly, our younger boy, when we lived on the Cape, and he might have been 6, and we were driving from his parents' house in Osterville to our place off Stony Cliff, and he said, well, who created God? That's a theological question, isn't it? Because we can't imagine the infinite, can we? I sure don't know the answer to that question. As President Obama used to say, that's above my pay grade. And every theologian and minister, and I know you've got a good pastor here, knows what they don't know, and that keeps us humble. You don't want a pastor who knows everything because, as Augustine said, if you think you know it, it isn't God. It's something of your own creation. We see enough gods of our own creation right now. Well, I've been thinking for years about this statement, God is still speaking. I've been thinking about it because it came out in 2002. Ron Buford, who some of you know, in the Cleveland office, was put in managing that. And I happened to come upon a piece he'd written somewhere in which he made a confession. He confessed that they got the cart in front of the horse. God is still speaking as it became a marketing campaign when it should have been a theological movement with a marketing plan. You get the difference, right? A theological movement is how you think about it. It gives you the picture that motivates you. It gets you up in the morning, right? You live in this world. And I knew there was something missing in it. It's a wonderful statement, isn't it? You can't have a better statement, really, than God is still speaking, right? You can't have a better statement than God is still speaking. Hello. Because it says something real about our world. And for 23 years, I thought about that statement, and I realized that nobody had ever written anything significant to talk about the statement, even though it was a big UCC statement. And one of my favorite statements comes from Rabbi Hillel, who was a contemporary of Jesus. And you may know the saying from Rabbi Hillel, if I'm not for myself, who will be? If I'm only for myself, who am I? If not now, when? And that struck me. If not now, when? Good to see you. If not now, when? And I thought to myself, I've been kvetching about nobody writing anything about this for 23 years. Boy, I'm boring to myself. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I ought to do something. When I puzzle about something, I write a book. And so I decided to write a book. It's called God is Still Speaking, Prophetic Theology and Spirituality for the United Church of Christ. Not pathetic theology, but prophetic theology and spirituality for the United Church of Christ. Sometime this year or next, an author doesn't have a lot of control when their books are published. It'll come out in Pilgrim Press, which is the oldest press in the United States, our denominational press, and that needs to be shouted out. And one of my students, Rachel Hackenberg, is the publisher of that, so I'm doubly proud of that. But I'm going to talk about that statement today. I'm going to talk about God is still speaking. When you hear those words, and I'm going to pause a few times in the course of our conversation because, you know, what George Bernard Shaw once said that professions are conspiracies against the laity. Just try to figure out, just try to read the medications that you're taking. You know, at least the ones I get have 4 pages of notes that go with them. I mean, if you want to go to sleep, that's a good way to do it. Or if I talk to somebody, I just give the phone to Kate. If I have to talk on an IT thing, and you've ever talked to an IT person about your computer? I just am lost after the 3rd sentence. And so I say to somebody much smarter than I at such things, Kate, help! You talk to that guy in India about this. Because they explain things, you know, that theology is the same way. Theologians can use all sorts of words, and the person who's listening to them wonders, well, what on earth is going on? So even though we might get into a little bit of the weeds today, I'll try to do it, as Habakkuk says, write the vision, make it plain. But I hope for some conversation among us as well. But I want to start with you, Because one of the best things I've discovered as a speaker is to figure out, is to help folks here do my talk. That way I might be able to sit over here and take a nap or something, or be entertained by some thoughts that I hadn't thought. So when you hear the word, God is still speaking, what comes to mind? No, as I say to students in class, there's never a wrong answer. There's just a professor who's not very creative in responding. So when you hear the words, God is still speaking, what comes to mind? Popcorn style. Nature. Yeah, God is still speaking. As the osprey spoke to me this morning as it was flapping its wings, and I was kind of worried he'd jump on my head like jumped on Mr. Merton's head a couple of years ago. It wasn't an osprey, thank goodness. Nature is speaking. Yeah. You know, Calvin, I think, said the universe is a theater of God's glory. And the primary revelation of God, another person said. So nature, what else? God is still, pardon me? Keep listening. Yeah, that was the old joke, as you may remember, the pastors among us in the UCC and the leaders among us, like Olivia and Terry. God is still speaking. Well, is anybody listening? That's debatable, isn't it? What else? Nature, listening, what else comes to mind? Yeah, Pastor.
I would say listening to public discourse that is bold enough to make statements of moral clarity where there is none.
Statements of moral clarity where there is none. So we have William Barber, for example, one of the great speakers of our time. We have Raphael Warnock. In the political realm, maybe we have James Tallarico. He hits it on the mark sometimes. We have, historically, people like Dorothy Day, people like Bishop Romero, Archbishop Jim Wallace. Yeah, people who like a laser look at what's going on in the world, and they may not have all the answers, but they say there's something wrong going on here. Something wrong. What else when you hear the word God is still speaking? When?
It makes me think of how there's so many voices now, and so much going on, so much conflict, that it's a reminder. God is speaking through all that.
Yeah. Through all that. Yeah, turn off the sound some days. Turn off the sound some days. Don't look at the news feed first thing in the morning. You know, Psalm 46, well worth the read. Go home, read Psalm 46. It could be the 21st century United States. Everything's chaotic. Be still and know that I am God. In the midst of trouble, there is another voice, another way of looking at it, a prophetic voice, as your pastor would say, a prophetic voice. Yeah.
And that is that what William spoke often, that the Bible seeks to open a discussion, and that God is still speaking through the words of Scripture. They are living, they are not, and they are living, and they still are open to fresh ways of encountering.
Fresh ways, yeah. Yeah. Yes. Some people have a very small Bible. A very small and unimaginative Bible. And a small and unimaginative God. One of my mantras is expect great things of God and expect great things of yourself. They go hand in hand, right? God's not interested in you playing small. God wants you to play big, knowing, of course, you're not the center of the universe. It's good not to be God, by the way. The old saying is God and I'm not. Thank goodness. Any other thoughts about this? Yes? Hope. It gives us hope. that ours is not the final word in the conversation, and maybe there's something more illuminating than what we hear in the larger world around us. Something more illuminating that gives us a bit of direction in our lives. Gives it a bit of direction. Kate.
What was the quote from Gracie Allen that was part of Ron Buford's thing? Something about don't put a period where God put a comma. That's right. Yeah. Isn't that right? Yeah.
Don't place a period where God places a comma.
And that's an existential personal thing, I think.
And what lends some power to that comment is apparently she wrote that when she was in a serious health situation that eventually led to her death. So this is not, when people are making comments when it's on the line, it's pretty important, right? Don't place a period. I mean, how many times do we discover, I know a few of you watch baseball games and basketball games, where a team either thought it's won the game and then collapses, or it looks like the team you're rooting for is losing, and you go away thinking they're losing, they end up scoring 6 runs in the final inning. You don't ever put a period where God has placed a comma. Yeah, yes. What did you say again? Through music. Yeah. I mean, think about the hymns that you heard Sunday. Or they could be any Sunday. I'm going to have to start listening to your church service sometime after I go to my own, instead of at the same time, 10 in the morning, because I know there's good music here. There's probably good preaching too. I have no doubt about that as well. But there's good music. And that song that she played after the prayer, I think, that just had a real beat to it. Yeah, the glory. Now that's music. Or the songs, the hymns that you've changed our lives, right? I recall when I was pastor here visiting Shirley Money. How many of you remember Shirley Money? And she was in hospice. And because she loved bluegrass music, they had taped bluegrass music. And she was, at that time, almost comatose. But, that doesn't keep your pastor from visiting you, by the way. You visit anyway. I know your pastor does. But she was listening deep down to that bluegrass music. Music can change you, can't it? Doesn't have to be religious music either. I mean, The Streets That Have No Name by U2. You can walk with that one a bit. You can walk with that one a bit, or music. The music of your life can take you to another place. Or perhaps there's nothing in which God isn't speaking. Go see Psalm 148. The whole universe is praising God. If we were on Cape Cod, as we are, and we were writing this psalm on Cape Cod, we'd say the waves and the sea were praising God. I know we had that scripture one time when I was pastor here, and one part of it says the snow is praising God. That might have been hard to believe a few months ago here on Cape Cod. But even the snow is praising God. The osprey are praising God. The water dogs are praising God. And so are we. We live in a world of praise. We're not, that's one of the reasons that we have to think big in our theology. There's a lot of people who think that there's a lot of places that are off limits to what you should be doing in your thinking, right? There's a whole group of Christians who believe science is the enemy. They don't know their theology, and I've got a few smart theologians here who studied well, like Dave Powers. And the early church fathers, wherever there's truth, God is its source. That can be anywhere, right? They were talking about the Greek philosophers, but the truth is in the laboratory, right? The truth is in your doctor's office. The truth perhaps might be in visiting an energy worker. The truth is in your attempt of God's truth, your attempt to write a story. The truth is dancing in church when your body is moving. You know, don't say that God is only here and not here. You know, one of the, people who think they're orthodox theologically oftentimes don't get it. I mean, I think some of our Christian brothers and sisters have never read the prophets before, even though they had a day of reading the Bible the other day. I don't know if they just skipped them, because the prophets tell us everybody needs to eat. The prophets tells us everybody needs a living. The prophet tells us everybody needs to experience healing. You know, no exceptions, right? And again, where is God? If you believe in, there's orthodox statements we've never quite got. You know, when you say God is omnipresent, that kind of means present everywhere, right? You can't be a little omnipresent. You either are or you aren't. So that means from the White House to the candy store over here, and I've had many an experience at the candy store, not all of them positive. God is there. God is even in the people that you don't like. So pray for the politicians you love and pray for the politicians you don't love. They all deserve it, right? You know, when I think of getting on my high horse, and it's pretty easy for theologians and ministers to get on their high horse, at least I've been guilty of that. I'm remembering that old Baptist song I grew up with, "Standing in Need of Prayer." We're all standing in need of prayer. God speaks to all of us, and yet we're finite, aren't we? God speaks to all of us, and we're finite, aren't we? Any other places where you think, God, I'm trying to get you to write my talk, actually. So I could just, put AI up here or something. Yeah, Ms. Baxter.
Since we are all created in God's image,
Yeah,
and you just mentioned God is omnipresent,
yeah.
then wherever
Wherever
we are, God is.
we are, God is. Now, I think I see, every minister, and I bet if you listen to your pastor, she uses phrases oftentimes that, they're your mantras, right? Every minister and speaker has mantras. So do you, right? You have words that you say that are your kind of special words. And I'm sure some of you may remember saying this on more than one occasion at South Church, because it's sort of been a mantra of mine for ages. It's from no one really knows where it came from, but it's notably from a fellow named Nicholas Cusanus, Nicholas Acusa, or also St. Bonaventure. God is like a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. You could make a theology out of that, right? You might only need that verse and it'd settle everything for you. God is like, he used the sphere, Bonaventure used the term sphere, like a circle whose center is everywhere. If center is everywhere, where's the center? Right where you are, right? The center is right where you are, Olivia. It's right where you are, Terry. It's right where you are, Alvina. It's right where you are, Howard. We're always in the center of God, aren't we? You look like you have a thought. You always have a thought, but it does make sense. It says nobody is untouched by God. Nobody is untouched by God. And everyone is touched as God is there. God is in their lives. Omnipresent. It's interesting because I've pondered over the years what this might mean in terms of revelation. And of course, in the long history of the church, people have talked about general revelation, that is the universal revelation, and particular revelation. I never felt that was a good separation myself. I think all revelation is special, but some of it is, as the Celts would say, thin places, special places in life where things shine out more boldly, but there's a continuity. The revelation in the Bible is continuous with the revelation in osprey flying. The revelation in the cells of your body is continuous with your soul. But then the other part of that is The God is like a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. There's nothing outside of it. Nothing outside of God's love. Nothing in the whole universe. There's no one excluded. We may feel like we have excluded ourselves, but God doesn't exclude us. That's a big deal. On the darkest night, whither shall I go from thy spirit? If I ascend to the heavens, thou art there. If I go down to the depths, thou art there. For even darkness is light unto thee. I like the King James on this one. Even if I'm the most depressed I can possibly be, I'm not alone. That's a big blanking deal, as Joe Biden said. He used another word, but it's just, you know what I'm saying. That's really an important word, right? You know, it's not running away from the police. Some of us have done that. I grew up in the 60s and tried to jump over fences to get into be-ins and love-ins. I don't know if I was beed or loved there, but I went to them anyway. You know, you wouldn't want a hippie to have to pay for anything. But God's chasing after you is very much like the 15th chapter of Luke's gospel. You know, the shepherd goes after the lost sheep. The woman goes after the lost coin. And there's a wonderful word. Sometimes you can get a whole theology in one word. It's the word until. In the Greek there, the word until says it all. You know the word until, don't you? You use it once in a while. When you were a kid, maybe, or when you were, if you were a parent, you might have said, I'm going to stay up until you come home. Anybody ever say that to you, or did you ever say that to somebody? You don't know how long that's going to be, right? Until has one of those words with 3 dots after it, or 4, depending on. There's no limit. For all these naysayers that think their neighbor's going to hell, they ought to read Luke 15 and read just one word, until. Until does not have any limitation to it. God seeks after us until we're found. That'll preach, won't it? Because there are a lot of people, you know, there's very little difference between theology and preaching, to be honest. And if you can't preach your theology, it's not worth teaching in some way. A lot of people believe there's a period, Kate, that there's a period, if you go beyond that point, you're lost. And they believe other people are lost, right? Those are our enemies, right? They're lost. Those are our foes, they're lost. Those are people different from us, they're lost. If whether your foe is on the left or the right makes no difference, sometimes we can excommunicate them spiritually, right? But what if the great until includes both AOC and Donald Trump? They're slightly different in approach. But what if the great until concludes both of them? We'd have a heck of a better country, wouldn't we, if we believed they were both worthy of love? If they were both worthy of love, and that even if we disagreed with AOC or Donald Trump, they're still God's children, right? And they still deserve our prayers and love. You know, the Bible makes a point to pray for the people you don't like. You know, love your enemies. That's a pretty hard thing in America to do, isn't it? We've made a whole industry in hating our enemies. And there's, I guess, and what was the new word? The most popular word last year was rage bait or something like that. You know, things that people see online and then they have to put something hateful after it, you know. God is still speaking as the God of until, and until has no limit. That's good news. It doesn't take us off the hook. We still have to be the best people we can be. But we don't. Love is not about punishment. Love is about healing. God is still speaking means that God's not finished. It means we can't put a period on our growth. It means it can't put a period on what you're doing and what's going to happen tomorrow. We can't say, this is all I am. I think it was Dorothy Day. I'm very fond of Dorothy Day, the social activist, Roman Catholic worker movement, who said, I speak to people as if they're angels. Boy, that's a tall order, isn't it? Now, she could get up on a high horse. She was not always easy, but she spoke to the people she worked with in the community, people going through tough times, hard times, as if they're angels. You know, one of our tasks at a church, I think, is to remember that everyone who comes down to the thrifty niche is touched by God. Everyone who comes to a group in church is touched by God. Everyone who comes to the service is touched by God. Each one of us. And keep that on our mind. It doesn't mean we're going to agree with everything. It may mean we'll protest even harder about the things that we need to so that everyone knows they're touched by God, right? Well, I'm going to pause a moment and just, ask me any question except my weight maybe and waist size or something like that, although it was smaller now than it was when I was on the Cape. But, I don't, there's not much food in Washington, D.C. It's not all that good food they have on Cape Cod, so it must be that. But any questions or thoughts? Yeah. 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 Well, that's a big question because certainly there's a good many of us in this room that are over 25, I think. Times 3. And AI is somewhat frightening to us, right? And with good reason. I mean, I've got to invoke a theologian just so you think I'm smart. But Reinhold Niebuhr, a great American theologian, and Paul Tillich both shared one thing in common, German-American, and of course Reinhold Niebuhr was in the UCC tradition, the German side of it, of the ambiguity of things. The ambiguity is a word that says, I have good news and I have bad news. I have good news and I have bad news and I better be careful. I am sure that God is at work in the evolutionary process of this universe and universes that came before ours. Yeah, okay. I mean, okay. Well, you come up here and talk now, Kate. Kate is still speaking. And you think about this, that at every big change in human history, people were worried about what would happen, right? Even the printing press, right? Even the automobile. What is that song from Oklahoma? I don't know why it came to me. I guess sometimes everything's up to date in Kansas City. They've gone about as far as they can. Anyone remember that song from Oklahoma? They've got those gas-propelled buggies in town. We don't even give a thought jumping in our car and driving 100 miles off Cape some days, or 2 miles to the church. Everything is ambiguous. It's good news and bad news, right? I take a couple medications for hypertension. Good news? I probably won't stroke out today. But there are effects of them, right? Some of you may take medications and you read all the potential side effects, right? But by gum, you're alive because of it, right? Or, yes, David.
Cause of problems are solutions.
Yes. than thinking we can solve everything, right? Yeah. Yeah. And you think with AI, we have good reason to be concerned. I was reading an article, wasn't rage bait exactly. I mean, I read 3 or 4 paragraphs on Palantir. It's a very big AI company. Peter Thiel is the CEO of that. He's a certain very interesting character. They have the ability to know everything you're doing in real time, or will soon have the ability to know everything you're doing in real time. Now, that gives me some pause, doesn't it you? I don't think the only one who needs to know everything I'm doing in real time is God. Because God is always out to help me and not to hurt me. Some of the things that the AI knows about us are good. You could get your credit taken care of to buy a house in 2 minutes. When we bought our house in Washington, D.C., in 2 minutes, they went through my credit record and said, okay, this guy's bought houses and you sold me the house. Bought houses on Cape Cod, bought houses in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Washington paid for them. He paid every month on time for 30 years or so. Oh, yeah, we'll loan him $500,000. Yeah, he's a good risk. That's good news, right? But on the other hand, I don't want everything. And in my field, and this is something to the writers among you, some presses are now having a codicil in addition to the contract on the press that says that the author should not use more than a particular percentage of their work from AI. But you can think about this. Well, I know, but if you were to tell some instrument, and I don't do this, I'm willing to make my own mistakes and take responsibility for them, to write an Inspector Gamache. Does anyone know Inspector Gamache? It's Louise Perry. An Inspector Gamache novel called 4 Pines. There was one called 3 Pines. Written in the style of Louise Perry, AI could do it. That's pretty crazy, right? I know some people who, my grandchildren do this, and they say, well, who's Bruce Epperly? What is he known for? Little do they know on AI. Thank God they don't know other things I'm known for. But, it'll have a 4 or 5 paragraph thing, and on the whole, some of the things they're not entirely accurate about. I think the one problem that we have in every advance is that we lack people who can make moral decisions. Any process that's based on profit alone is dangerous. Every process should take into consideration the common good. Yeah, David.
One of the ways God is speaking, I think, is through Facebook people who may not be well-grounded, quoting gospel imperatives that urge care.
Yes.
Concern.
Yeah.
It'll often be a Bible verse, one of the Beatitudes.
Yeah.
And that's coming up on my feeds.
Well, yeah. Well, yes, and technology is not all bad. We have to remember that most of us are maybe in the room because some good medication came to us or our loved one, right? And we have to say, praise the Lord, thank you, Jesus, for that. On the other hand, so any system that is based on power or profit is inherently problematic. And what God is still speaking does in the world of ethics creates a type of democracy of the spirit. If God is still speaking, then everyone has the potential of saying something wise every so often. And everyone's self should be appreciated. And anyone, remember that biblical passage about Balaam's ass speaking to the prophet and giving him some wisdom. I always say, if Balaam's ass can get it right, sometimes the person next to me can as well. That even the non-human world can be a source of wisdom to us. Now, I have a sort of a mystical sense about the birds in the morning. And, you know, if you're up early enough that you'll hear them start singing, right? And if you listen well, sometimes it sounds like they're speaking to you. Augustine, St. Augustine, part of his Christian journey was he thought he heard some children saying, read this book, read this book. And he read this book and it took him on his Christian way. In my experience, I was thinking about writing a book at one time, and I thought I heard a bird say, write this book, write this book. I don't know if the bird had intended to say that to me, but that's the way I heard it, and I was a little worried about writing the book because it was going to stretch me in an area I hadn't ever written before. It was a book on the prophet Amos speaking to America, and it's this nice little book. They told me that as I was walking around Potomac, Maryland, which is a fairly upscale community like Newton Center, like Lexington, places like that. A lot of opulence there. What would Amos say to the United States, the prophet in the 21st century, when some people have billions of dollars and other people are starving? Prophet would be kind of difficult for us. Prophet doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat, by the way, or who you voted for. The prophet says, feed the hungry. The prophet said, make sure somebody has a house. Doesn't care how you get that. Make sure the scales are accurate. I think it was Abraham Joshua Heschel who said, in his book on the prophets, it's a little dense, but I think it's among the best books on the prophets you'll ever read, said the prophets were so concerned and believed God was so concerned about us that God was even concerned about the scales in which they weighed grain, or the price of gas, or the national debt. Those things matter, don't they? Even the smallest thing matters. I think somebody smarter than me, who was a better speaker than me, in church yesterday, told me what I'd said in the sermon, and she said it better than I did, and that every little thing matters. And every little thing does matter. God might be speaking in the person right next to you and be giving you a revelation to the person right next to you. Yes, Pastor.
What do you do with the Christian movement we call Christian nationalism,
Okay.
which tries to diminish
Okay.
the still speaking voice of God?
And I think you have to say that God is bigger than any movement. God is bigger than any movement because, go back, we love music here at South Church, and we love music at the church over in Falmouth that you go to. Who's your pastor there? Yeah, he's a good guy, isn't he? Yeah, I remember he just came on the Cape when I was here. He's a really good guy. I'm glad he's still there and glad he's still speaking. But yeah, think about again what God is still speaking and the word until, and the thing God is a circle, the center is everywhere, and the circumference is nowhere. If the circumference is nowhere, then everyone is part of the circle, right? And God is speaking to Iranians and Israelis and Americans and loves them all. That's one of the most greatest deterrents to war is to realize, or to morality in fighting is to realize that everyone's a child of God. So we do our best not to. And that it's a struggle because, at least I think this has something to do with theology, and if I had 2 or 3 more hours, which I think probably most people will probably be sleeping in 20 minutes, but I would talk about the contrasting theology. I'll talk about it for a minute, and I try not to. I don't think we'll have to cut the weeds too much, but and it could be David might disagree with me on this point, but I'm a little hard on the Calvinist tradition. I mean, I like some of the things Calvin says, but the Calvinist tradition has been used or misused oftentimes to separate the sheep from the goats. And the sheep know who they are, and they know who the goats are. And so when you know who the goats are, you're usually wrong. And of course, a whole history was built upon the notion that God's providence had led some people to rule over other people, right? And that God's providence chose some and not others. I'm fairly correct, aren't I, David?
But those who are not sheep now can repent and be
They could, but not if they were predestined from eternity. We don't believe that, but think of it this way. The belief that you are the chosen ones oftentimes has its dark side, that others aren't chosen. They could be indigenous people. They could be people on the southern part of the African continent. They could be Japanese during World War II in California, my home state. Yeah, Kate.
Well, in terms of word, and God still speaking, and Sally's question, to me, fundamentalist Christians and those who would support some kind of idea of Christian nationalism have the idea that the word stopped, and that there was...
Yep.
And a lot of, again, back to fundamentalist understanding of Scripture, a literal interpretation of Scripture, it was written once and for all, and then God was done,
Yeah.
And that's what the fallacy is for me, is because I believe in historical critical understanding of the Bible, which means we understand a collection of books written by different people over time, and
Yeah.
it's a library, and there's new books being discovered in caves, that kind of thing. So I have a copy right now of the New Testament, where they've included all the other Gospels, which were found in Qumran and other places. I'm sorry, yeah. But anyway, I'm just saying the issue of literalism and fundamentalism is behind the answer that I would have to Christian nationalists. But again, and I belong to a group called Writer Angels, and they're trying to get us to talk across the boundaries, both of Democrat, Republican, or fundamentalist, or progressive, and it's hard. But finding the words, I believe we should do, we must do. That's my answer.
And
And that's really, really hard. And you can study mediation and, reconciling language, but as Christians, there's really a sharp, divide between those who understand the Bible's word literally and history literally, as in somehow the United States as a Christian nation,
Yeah.
they're done, versus something that's transforming. And I just think if you can help people, I don't have the answer for it. If you get to help them, that would be better. Yeah.
Yeah, Wendy, and then Alvina. Yeah.
And I would always look up at arguments. And no matter where you sit, you'll have a different view
Yeah.
of the entire church. Like if you look at that one, and I look at that one, and you look at this one, you're all going to see a different view. But what always came to me is it's the same church.
Okay.
The thought would have
Okay.
it's sort of a deep thought, but I'm just
Well, no, that is.
everybody's view is different right now. If you look at that one and I look at that one, but we're actually all a part of the same church, and every one of those walls, you can stand anywhere, you'll see the church. It's amazing. I'm sorry, that's such a deep thought, but I always sit there.
No, Wendy, that's a beautiful deep thought. And both of you are right on target. The sense, again, that difference doesn't mean enmity. Difference doesn't mean enmity. That difference is built into the universe. There are ospreys and there are larks. There's bluegrass and crabgrass. And you think of it, though, one of the problems, and back to the initial question about Christian nationalism, and we all have our parochial visions, is it tends to believe that chosenness is small. God is still speaking, says chosenness is all. And if everyone's chosen, then deep down beneath the borders of our country, as one of the astronauts said a few weeks ago, this is one world. We need to wake up. We need to wake up. And we need to find out what is it we really want. Deep down, what is it that everyone wants in life, in spite of their differences? Certain one aspect of his love. Pardon me? Acceptance. Deep down. And it's not easy, by the way, to deal with people whose positions are radically different than your own. And I have to admit, I get my dander up once in a while, too. But you probably have the answer, Alvina. Yes. Okay. 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 Yes. Well, and it's an interesting thing because if you study the history of the church, and after 45 years of teaching theology, I taught the first 4 centuries of Christianity for the first time. I mean, I studied it in grad school and along the way, and I had to really, I was teaching it to United Methodist course of study to lay ministers for Wesley Seminary. And if you realize that the early churches struggled with universality and particularity. And the fact that we're here in this room today had something to do with somebody, and Paul had some good days, by the way, believing that the gospel pertained to everybody. He wasn't anti-Jewish by any stretch of the imagination, but the gospel went beyond Judea. Everybody was chosen in Christ. Christ is the yes of all things. And I think one of the things we need to do is to keep saying yes to God's presence in people who differ from us. Provide a better alternative. These are hard days for churches, and not just our church, but these are hard days for speakers too. Boy, I'm starting to get into this now. I may start speaking in tongues soon. But, these are hard days. But the best thing a church like South Congregational Church can do is to provide a loving alternative. To provide, you've got the sign on the marquee, everyone's welcome here. And then mean it. Then mean it. One of my mentors was Gordon Forbes, and Gordon Forbes is a pastor among pastors. He mentored me and Kate both when we came to Washington, D.C. in our late 20s, and he was pastor of our church that we still belong to after all these years. And he told me of an experience that converted him. He has said he was pastor of a big church in Minnesota, and somebody said, well, do I have to be a Democrat to belong to this church? And that really convicted him. That really convicted him that he needed to look bigger. That everybody should have a home here. Even sometimes we have to challenge them. Certain things shouldn't go on in the church.
I agree 100%. Well, I'm going to be provocative.
You be provocative, Pastor.
Provocative because I'm not preaching right now. I can be provocative, okay? It's okay. So, yes. And in this setting, yes. But I was listening to Rowan Williams.
Okay.
Former
Yes.
Bishop of Canterbury, and someone I knew in Oxford when I was there. And he was being interviewed a few days ago. And he was very correct. He said, I believe
Okay.
And he
Okay.
said it is our responsibility to call it out.
Okay, I agree.
When there's evil, you call out evil.
Yep.
And so how do you balance that? Because, well, everybody is a child of God, yes, and the Spirit of God is in everyone.
But you can
And
challenge.
we listen to one another, but can we acknowledge that there is evil in the world?
Well, I think we can, and a person who has been very helpful to me, and I was fortunate to have met him a couple times in his elder years, was Howard Thurman. And he has a wonderful little essay on mysticism and social change that inspired me to write a little book on Thurman called Prophetic Healing. Thurman was a grandchild of a slave woman who he read the Bible to her as a child because she was not literate in reading the language. She was as smart as a person as you can meet, Nancy Ambrose. And she never wanted him to read Paul because when she was growing up, the slave masters would preach, and somehow or other in every sermon would be slaves obey your masters. So she didn't ever want to read Paul. Howard Thurman grew up to be one of the great theologians and spiritual leaders of our time, was the first African American ever to be a dean at a major university, Boston University here, dean of chapel, dean of the Marsh Chapel. As his essay says, the mystic has to put pressure and challenge anything. He doesn't use the word demonic. He's a very soft-spoken man. But you have to challenge any oppression for the healing of the oppressor. The oppressor is not going to be healed, and you have to make it hard for them, but you have to yet seek their healing. And I think it's a tough one because I happen to hold a similar view about the demonic. It's when something presumes to be the divine and takes the authority of the divine upon itself and believes it can speak for God. We have to look for the demonic, but realize that the people who share the demonic are still salvageable. There's a belief in the early church among a minority group that even Satan gets saved at the final day. That there can't be universal salvation. God can't be all in all unless Satan gets back. So the people that perpetrate demonic need to be called for that. We have to challenge the Proud Boys. We have to challenge the Ku Klux Klan. We have to challenge any sort of racism, any sort of anti-Judaism in our world, any sort of hate based on race, gender, place of origin, etc., sexuality. It has to be challenged because God loves them, us. There's no them, us here. No them, us. It has to be challenged. And I think the challenge for us, and certainly it's a challenge for me, is to figure out how to do it in a way that helps the situation rather than hurts it.
No, and I do understand that. Again, as we've talked, when it comes to anti-Semitism, when it comes to racism, when it comes to the evil we are witnessing in
Yes.
the world today,
Yes.
where people are being oppressed
Yes.
and killed, they're not two sides of an argument.
Well, I agree.
There's only one. There is the side of goodness and morality
Yes.
and grace.
Yes.
The side that does not promote that is not, that's the side of evil, the side that is not speaking for God.
Yes, and I think that the thing that keeps us honest when we do that is to recognize our own fallibility.
Yes, that's true.
And so you're exactly right. I mean, we have to confront all of those. And it's tough to do it because it may mean the parting of the waters sometimes. It may mean that you don't show up in certain places or you do show up in certain places. Yeah, Wendy, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah.
It's so hard not to get angry if what I don't feel is
Yeah.
right, but I keep remembering in my mind how those that are being hurt by it and leave the judgment of the others.
Every one of us, I think, yeah, I think you're working well. And every one of us, and I say this about ministers, has encountered situations in our ministry where we had to, play a little rough. Domestic abuse. That doesn't go over any day, anywhere, any time. And I think, again, I've not had a lot of opportunities to respond to that, but I know Kate has in the course of her ministry more often than I, because I think the women were more likely to talk to women than men. But you can't, one of the options said, you need to get out of there tomorrow, or today, or 5 minutes ago. You need to get a restraining order. There's no gray area in that. And you could end up somebody hating their, especially if they're in a church, hating their pastor, but once in a while that happens to a minister who's done the right thing.
And I got the restraining order put on me, too, for trying.
So sometimes you have to...
Keep the perpetrator away from me.
Yeah. He got the restraining order. You did the right thing. There was no choice but to do that, the right thing. Other thoughts? I was raised among Baptists, so I was, 2 or 3 hours is reasonable, and then they said, and they sang a hymn and went out. Any other thoughts today? Kate?
This is something to answer one idea for how you can respond. When I was on the Human Rights Commission here at Barnesville, I don't know what they're doing now, but we did active bystander training. So if you see an injustice, you can come alongside the person and do an active bystander. You're not becoming an ally with them. And there's ways to do that. And I think that's the same on a lot of different things, and that includes protests. And I just want to say I'm past my protesting days, but the last thing I protested, and this relates to the comment about anti-Semitism, both Virginia and Maryland counties passed laws that said if you speak out against or for Gaza, you could be seen legally as being anti-Semitic, in other words, being against Israel, and be arrested for that. I protested that. It passed anyway. So, yeah. But those are the places where you can speak up or stand up. And there are lots of little ways that things show up in our society that, are just creeping in. So just keep your eyes open and stand up and speak up. That's one of them.
Just one thought. I'm going to give a kudo to this congregation. The Here Now ministry, that's still around, isn't it? That came out of our church, remember? Some of you were part of getting that started. I remember having a conversation with Pam Wane one day, and I said, well, go ahead and do it. She was the one to do it and not me. It was her passion, but one of the things a leader does, and I'm sure you see it in this congregation, is to let good passions move forward by the ones who should move it forward. And look at it now. It's growing. It's doing a good work. Those are other people, in quotes. Those are those other people that we might think are different from us, but they really aren't. That's good work. Were you going to say something, Fran? Yeah. It is probably not a good idea for the church and the state to be too connected. I think the best place for the state to be involved in the church is to ensure the freedom of safe religion. And when I use the term safe religion, some religion is abusive. Let's be honest here. That does danger to body, mind, or spirit. Now that's a whole other world. I was, in my own life, this is a very small potato stuff, but I was in charge of, at Georgetown University, of which groups, religious groups, got admitted to campus, because we were a private group, private university, so we had the right to do that. And I researched all sorts of groups that wanted to operate on campus, and I was the senior Supreme Court justice, I guess, or something on this, so I made the final decision. We didn't ever do it based on belief, we did it based on behavior. I became kind of the darling of the evangelical groups on campus because I supported them having groups on campus. The Catholics that were the Catholic University were not always happy about that, but they served a purpose. But there were certain limitations that you don't go beyond. You have to be honest. You can't use high pressure techniques, et cetera, et cetera. The same would apply here, and a danger for church and government, to me, is when the government believes it has God's blessing for everything it does. Lincoln said it right. I think Lincoln, in many ways, was our greatest president. He was fallible, and he knew it. Yeah, but he was asked us to one time pray that God be on the side of the Union. And of course, Lincoln was the Union, right? He was the face of the Union. He said, I will not pray that God is on our side, but that we're on God's side. You know, that reminds us that even our best intentions, we could be fallible. You know, what does Reinhold Niebuhr said? I must look for the truth in my neighbor's falsehood and the falsehood in my own truth. In other words, the limitations of our positions. We have to, you know, and being humble keeps us honest. I know that, again, one of my mantras as an administrator and as a pastor, and some of you might have gotten tired of me saying this occasionally, was there's more than one right way to do it here. And it's not necessarily my way. Some people are smarter than us. And God always is smarter than us. What do you think? Shall we go on 4 more hours, or is this the right time? You're going to give the speaker the hook. Well, thank you. And I have to confess one thing, that the outline I gave you doesn't bear a big resemblance to what we talked about today. Because the minute I got in the room, and the minute you started sharing things, I knew that we